Lawmakers in the Solomon Islands have picked a new prime minister in an election that was closely watched by the Pacific's major powers. Jeremiah Manele is a former foreign minister who's pledged to continue following policies of ever closer ties with China. Now, the Solomon Islands occupy a strategic position northeast of Australia, which is of interest to China, and its goal of expanding its influence in the Pacific. The new prime minister says he'll bring more infrastructure to the islands. Australia has traditionally been the archipelago's biggest donor, but China is catching up and has constructed roads, a sports stadium and a telecommunications network. Parker Novak is an Indo-Pacific geopolitics expert with the Atlantic Council think tank. He joins us from Washington, D.C. Welcome to DW. Let's start with why the US and China care so much about who leads this tiny little chain of islands off the east coast of Papua New Guinea and north of Australia.
Yeah, good to be with you today. And I think the answer to that is that because of the geopolitical location of the Pacific Islands, the wider region carries geopolitical implications for Indo-Pacific geopolitics, which are very much relevant to China, the United States, Australia, and other countries in the region. And because of the Solomon Islands location, or strike key sea lanes in the Melanesian archipelago, it draws a lot of interest from outside powers. And ultimately, if you're able to exercise influence in the Solomon Islands, you're able to then project influence outwards, potentially. And I think that's ultimately what interests China in their embrace of the Solomon Islands.
OK, so the previous prime minister grabbed the world's attention when he signed a security deal with China back in 2022. And the new guy, Jeremiah Manele, looks like he's going to continue his country's China-friendly stance. Why? What's in it for the Solomon Islands?
The argument that Mr. Sagavari made during the election campaign, that Mr. Manele, others aligned with them, made in the campaign and argued, was that aligning with the Solomon Islands not only is bringing them increased development benefit from China, particularly in the economic realm, but also is causing other outside powers like Australia and the United States to queue up with additional development and economic aid that would not otherwise be there. I think there's certainly a debate to be had as to whether Chinese aid has had the desired impact within the country or not. And, whilst Mr. Sagavari was well known for his embrace of China, he was very public and forward-leaning about it. Mr. Manele was his foreign minister for 5 years, and he was ultimately a key architect of that deal and one of the folks who spearheaded it during the Sagavari administration. And we can expect that, broadly speaking, to continue.
Right. So, I gather it's a very nuanced argument, but it does sound like the Solomon Islands are playing one side off against the other.
That is the case. Yeah, I think there's a lot of commentary and analysis around that. It effectively argues that. I do think one angle that is important to mention is that when Mr. Sagavari was in office, there was also an ideological drive to him for personal and professional reasons. He is known for having a bit of an anti-Australian attitude. So there was also an element of that at play. And I think Mr. Sagavari also thought by securing additional development aid from China that he would be able to exercise influence over how it was dispensed in the country that was going to help him hold power at home and win the election, which, you had mixed results on. Obviously, he's not returning as prime minister, but he is still returning as a member of parliament for his constituency and can certainly be expected to exercise influence moving forward, despite not holding the top job anymore.
OK, so have the US, Australia, or indeed the West in general, have we dropped the ball here and let China sort of slide in without us noticing because the US et al. Have been taking the Solomon Islands effectively for granted?
Whether it happened unnoticed or noticed really depends on who you ask. There's a lot of folks who make arguments one way or the other. But I think the fact is that once diplomatic recognition from the Solomon Islands was switched from China to Taiwan, and particularly when the security agreement was made in 2022, that woke Western countries up. You've since seen the United States, for example, open an embassy in Honiara. You've seen increased Australian development aid and economic aid. And you've certainly seen Western powers, really wake up And I think there's something to be said that they might have been behind the eight ball a little bit, but they're certainly making up for that. And I think they may see a sliver of opportunity with the new prime minister, despite him being poised to broadly continue the country's look north foreign policy.
OK, so playing both sides off against each other, are Solomon Islanders therefore likely to look around in, I don't know, 2 years, 4 years, 10 years' time and say, oh, look, we've got airports, schools, shops, houses. Are they going to see some tangible benefits?
That is the intent. And that was something Mr. Sagavari tried to argue during the campaign, that it was bringing economic benefit, that the infrastructure, say, for the Pacific Games was bolstering the country's national pride and regional influence. But you saw his opponents during the campaign, argue against that, with one example being the parliamentary opposition leader, Matthew Wale, who essentially criticized Mr. Sagavari for getting stadiums built and not funding hospitals, not building schools, and argued that Chinese aid was not actually delivering the promised benefits. And if you look at the state of the Solomon Islands economy, it is one of the more underdeveloped countries in the world. Poverty is pretty high. Healthcare is lacking. I think there's something to be said that Chinese development aid has not delivered what Prime Minister Sagavari promised.
Thanks for talking us through that. Parker Novak from the Atlantic Council. Thank you.
To be with you. Thank you.